In the summer of 2019, a grandmother named Barbara was looking after her grandkids for the weekend while her daughter and her husband were out of town. Her daughter had 3 kids, 2 that were under the age of 6 and 1 who was 15 years old, and her name was Alyssa. And so anytime Barbara was looking after her grandkids, she would just stay at their house. Barbara and Alyssa's room were right next to each other, looking out to the side of the property. And so as soon as Barbara got in her room, she opened up the window that was right next to her bed. She has a screen that's in her window, and Barbara crawls into bed and she falls asleep. At about 3 a.m., Barbara wakes up to the sound of rustling coming from outside of her window. And she pulled the curtain aside and she noticed propped up against the fence was this bike that she didn't recognize. She sees a boy emerge from the bushes. He's got that high school Letterman jacket. He's looking up into Alyssa's room. And so Barbara immediately thinks, okay, this guy is probably one of Alyssa's friends, maybe a boyfriend. So she figured she would just go out there and be stern with him and he'd get the message. She walks out of her room to the front of the house. So he's over here, side of the house, and she quickly walks around to the edge of the porch. So she pokes her head over and she goes, "Can I help you?" And this kid turns and looks at her for the first time. And immediately Barbara's like, oh, whoa, he is not a teenager. He looks like he's in his 20s, if not 30s. And he looks up at her and he says, "I'm looking for Alyssa McCarran. She lives here." And so Barbara says to the guy, "I need you to stay right there. Give me a minute. I'll be right back." And so Barbara went back inside the house. She shut and locked the door behind her. And then she went into Alyssa's room and she shook her foot to wake her up. And she says to Alyssa, "Did you invite a boy here tonight?" And Alyssa's like, "No, what are you talking about?" Barbara narrowed her eyes and she said, "Well, there's a boy outside that clearly knows you. He asked for you by name and he knows you live here and he's outside right now." Alyssa's confused and she's looking at her grandmother like, "What are you talking about?" And so she leans back and she opens the curtain of her window and she looks outside and immediately she pulls her head back in and she says, "Grandma, he asked for me by name?" And Barbara's like, "Yeah, he said Alyssa McCarran lives here." And Alyssa's like, "We have to call 911. I've never seen him before in my life." Suddenly, everything made sense for Barbara. And she tells Alyssa, "Stay in your bed, do not move." And Barbara runs out of her room. She goes into her bedroom and she shuts that window and locks it and then runs to the front of the house. And she yelled out, "There's no Alyssa McCarran here. You have the wrong house. You need to leave or I'm calling the police." And he says, "I know Alyssa lives here. Tell her to come outside." And Barbara picks up her phone and she calls 911. And she intentionally talks really loudly into the phone. And she saw him run to the left of the house. Barbara runs into the bedroom where she was sleeping and she looks out the side window. And the last she sees of this guy is riding his bike across the street. And then he stops next to an SUV and he opens a trunk and he throws the bike in the trunk. And he gets in the passenger side of the car and they drive off. The police show up a couple minutes later and the police told her that over the past couple of weeks, they've gotten very similar reports from other households where there are young girls inside of the house. Apparently, this boy was actually a grown man that would use social media to figure out where kids lived, and then he would dress up like a teenager and then he would go stalk them. And who knows how long he had been looking in the window at her at night.